Hi guys, Olive here today to bring you the next installment in my ongoing series all about the 90s PBS Kids TV show, Wishbone. Wishbone was an educational program that adapted famous works of literature and showed portions of the plot of whatever book they were choosing to highlight per episode, alongside a real-life storyline of a family living in Texas with their pet Jack Russell Terrier, Wishbone. In these videos I do here on my channel, I look at one episode of Wishbone and I compare it against the famous work of literature they chose to adapt for that episode. I look at what they chose to include from the book versus what they might have left out for whatever reason. I try to pin down the moral message they were trying to extract from the work and communicate to the young audience. And at the end of the day, I attempt to judge whether or not it made for a successful episode of television. In today's video, we'll be looking at the episode that takes on Jules Verne's classic subterranean adventure tale, Journey to the Center of the Earth, in a mid-season 1 episode entitled Hot Diggity Dog. So here we go. What's the story, Wishbone?
What's the story, Wishbone? What's this you're dreaming of?
At the beginning of the episode, there are two different attempts going on. Wishbone is attempting to find a way to cure his boredom, and Wanda, a neighbor of the central family, is attempting to plant a tree for Arbor Day. She convinces the kids, meaning Wishbone's owner Joe and his friends Sam and David, to help her dig a hole for the tree she intends to plant. Well, this proves very exciting for Wishbone and the perfect antidote to his boredom. He makes sure to note that for dogs, digging is an adventure, not completely unlike the one that happens in the summer of 1863 in Journey to the Center of the Earth by Jules Verne. We see Axel, a lover of geology, but not necessarily the adventurous type, his uncle, the professor who insisted on this mission and who is played by Wishbone, and their guide Hans as they travel to Iceland to rappel down into an extinct volcano that they've learned leads into the core of the Earth. It's a hard journey, and Axel is very discouraged, especially as he sees that the team is running out of water. His uncle, the professor, played by Wishbone, gives him the last drop of water that they have, but even though they are now out of water completely, he refuses to humor the idea of turning around and going back up to the surface. Thankfully, their guide Hans makes a refreshing discovery of a subterranean river behind the rock. Meanwhile, back in the real storyline, Wishbone is helping Wanda dig this hole when he discovers something buried in the ground. It is a small, round, gold object, and when Joe's mom washes it, she discovers that there is some Latin writing on it. Joe's mom gets to work translating the Latin on this object because she did study a little bit of Latin back in high school, but in the meantime, the kids fancy that it's either buried treasure or something from a secret society. Under the earth, even though they've now found water, Axel is still having some pretty big regrets about coming along on this journey, especially after a period of time where he gets separated from his companions, and also after an encounter with a terrible sea monster. And not just like in terms of his disposition, but also some truly awful CGI. But once he discovers a fascinating fossil, he starts singing a different tune and wants to see this mission through. However, when he gets the idea to blow up a cave wall so as to remove it as an obstacle, it accidentally triggers the volcano and some more awful CGI as they are shot to the surface. Back in Texas, the kids, with the help of Joe's mom, realize that the object that they found is actually a medal, but they also realize that it's missing its backing. Galvanized by this information, they head back to the hole where Wanda has kept on digging this whole time, and they all start shoveling with a fury. They go so hard, in fact, that they hit the sprinkler line, dousing poor Wanda. But Wishbone saves the day and finds the missing other half, revealing who it was who earned that medal. It's a little bit of a simpler episode. I normally have to spend a whole lot more time breaking down all the plot points of the episode than I had to in this case. But I think at the core of this episode, pardon the pun, is the theme of adventure. It's made pretty clear in this episode that Axel is not too keen on taking this journey or to continue with this journey. There are several different times in the episode where he's pleading with his uncle to turn back and go back up to the safety of the surface, but his uncle flat out refuses. He wants to keep pushing forward. And I feel that that's somewhat connected to the real life storyline in the theme of nothing ventured, nothing gained, or in this case, no adventure, no gain. I feel like the main message in this episode is with perseverance comes reward. The kids accidentally find this object, they clean it up, they do their research, they figure out that there's a missing portion to it, they keep digging, and they end up with a prize. And Axel and his uncle end up taking an underground trip that only one other person in the world has ever taken taken before, and for a scientist, that's a lofty prize as well. I do need to mention that the fact that someone else had taken this trip before them is alluded to. It is vaguely mentioned in the episode, but it's never really explained. In the beginning of the novel, we see Axel and his uncle discover a coded message in a book about Iceland. They have to decipher it. They figure out that it talks about this extinct volcano, and it also mentions who wrote it. In the episode, we see that person's initials marking their path as they move forward, but it's never really explained who that person is or why they can trust that path. Since we start the novel sections in the episode when they're already making their way inside the volcano, we miss that whole first part, which is actually a very entertaining part, and I think would make things clearer when you watch the episode. Those sections might be a little bit hazy for anyone who hasn't read the book, which is probably most modern kids watching this episode. Of course, the kids finding something underneath the earth is obviously a wink at the novel at the center of this episode, but I couldn't help but notice that what they find is indeed an object. It is treasure. Now, ultimately, it brings more knowledge than it does financial gain, but it is still something physical that they find. But in the book, and in the adaptation of the book in this episode, there is no indication that the professor and his team are looking for anything in a physical sense. They're just trying to make their way into the center of the earth. They're not actually trying to bring anything back with them except knowledge. So in that way, I felt the two storylines didn't quite match up. However, in this episode, more so than in any other episode I've seen of Wishbone, they had to do a lot of visual effects. They first had to make it seem like these actors were actually underground, and then they had to make it seem like they were in the middle of an erupting volcano. And while the CGI was not the greatest, this was back in the 90s, I do think the other effects they did were fairly successful. In the real life storyline, I really loved how invested the kids got into the mystery of the metal. I feel like that's very realistic for kids. Their imaginations run wild. They'll have all sorts of theories about what it could be, and they're just determined to get to the bottom of things. I feel like any kid watching this would very much be able to relate to that and would also be very invested in that part of the story. This is also one of the rare episodes where Wishbone isn't playing the narrator from the book. He's not playing Axel, he's playing the professor. And so we hear a lot more from the actor playing Axel. We get a lot more dialogue from him because we don't have that kind of inner dialogue coming from Wishbone like we normally do. It was a little bit weird not having Wishbone be as central to the episode as he normally is. However, the professorial glasses that they have Wishbone wear in this episode are positively adorable. It almost makes it worth it to have some of the attention off of Wishbone just to get to see him in those glasses. I really wish my cat would tolerate wearing those. All in all, this was a decent episode of Wishbone. There isn't a really big moral message to Journey of the Center of the Earth because it's mainly just an adventure story. So I can see they pivoted and just focused on making this episode fun, which I thought it was, despite the very bad CGI. The link between the two storylines wasn't great, but it was good enough. So it's not the best episode of Wishbone I've seen, but it's definitely not the worst. So that was my take on this episode of Wishbone. If you have any comments or questions about anything you've seen in this video or about anything in general, please feel free to put it in the comment section below. But if you would prefer to connect with me somewhere other than YouTube, I am on a variety of different places on social media, and the links to all of my profiles will be in the description box below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you're having a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye.